You're standing on a frozen slope in the Ural Mountains, and the tent in front of you has been cut open from the inside. Not unzipped. Cut. With a knife. In -30 degrees, 9 hikers ran out into the snow without their coats. Without their boots. Some of them without their shoes at all. What could make trained mountaineers flee into a blizzard barefoot? This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. And more than 60 years later, nobody fully agrees on what happened. It starts in January 1959. 9 experienced hikers, most of them students at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, set out on a skiing expedition through the northern Urals. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 2-3-year-old engineering student known for careful planning. This wasn't a group of amateurs. They had done treks like this before. They knew the cold. They knew the mountains. On February 1st, they pitched their tent on the slope of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kholat Syakhl. Translated, it means dead mountain. They didn't know that name yet. Or maybe they did, and it didn't matter, because nothing about that name explained what came next. When they failed to check in, search parties went out. What they found, weeks later, made international headlines. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. Footprints in the snow led away from it, down the mountain, into sub-zero temperatures. Some hikers wore only socks. One had a single boot. The trail of footprints simply stopped, buried by fresh snowfall. The first bodies were found near a cedar tree, about a mile from the tent. Broken branches, up to 5 meters high, suggested someone had climbed for a better view, or to escape something on the ground. The bodies showed signs of hypothermia. Nothing unusual. Yet. Then, the remaining bodies were found. And the details stopped making sense. Let's lay out the evidence, layer by layer. First, the tent itself. Investigators determined the cuts came from inside, meaning the hikers cut their own way out rather than through the entrance. Why would trained mountaineers destroy their only shelter in a blizzard unless something outside was more dangerous than the cold itself? Second, the injuries. Soviet investigator Lev Ivanov, who led the original inquiry, documented catastrophic trauma on several bodies. One hiker had major skull damage. 2 others had massive chest fractures, the kind of force typically associated with a car crash, not a fall on foot. And yet there were no external wounds. No cuts. No bruises on the skin above the broken bones. Whatever crushed them did so without touching the surface. Third, radiation. Some of the clothing tested by Soviet forensic teams showed elevated radioactive contamination. This was 1959, deep in the Cold War, less than 15 years after the world's first nuclear tests. The detail was in the official case file. It was never explained. Fourth, one victim was missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her lips. Soviet investigators attributed this to natural decomposition in running water, since her body was found in a stream months later. Skeptics have never fully accepted that explanation. So what happened? Over the decades, 3 competing theories have dominated the conversation. Theory 1. An avalanche. In this reading, a small slab avalanche struck the tent at night, forcing the hikers to cut their way out in panic and flee downhill, disoriented in the dark and cold, before succumbing to hypothermia. A 2019 study using physics modeling, published by Swiss researchers Alexander Puzerin and Johann Gaum, supported a delayed slab release triggered by the cut the hikers made in the slope while pitching camp. It's plausible. But it doesn't fully explain the crushing internal injuries, with no matching skin damage, or why the group split up and left some of the injured behind in the open. Theory 2. A military accident. Some investigators have proposed the group witnessed, or was caught near, a secret Soviet weapons test. This would account for the radiation traces and the catastrophic blunt trauma, consistent with a shockwave or an explosion at a distance. Declassified Cold War test records for the region remain incomplete, which is exactly what keeps this theory alive. The Soviet government sealed the original case files for decades. Why seal a mundane accident? Theory 3. Infrasound-induced panic, sometimes called the Kármán vortex street effect. Under this idea, wind moving around the mountain's specific shape generated a low-frequency sound below human hearing, one known to cause disorientation, nausea, and irrational fear. In this reading, the hikers weren't fleeing a person or an avalanche. They were fleeing a feeling, an invisible, physically real force with no clear source, driving them out into the freezing dark in blind panic. Here's the twist that unsettles even hardened investigators. It may not have been just one cause. The avalanche theory explains the flight from the tent. It does not explain the internal injuries without matching surface wounds, injuries some medical examiners have compared to being struck by a wall of pressure, not blunt objects. Combine an avalanche-triggered evacuation with a secondary, unrelated phenomenon, a pressure wave, a fall into a ravine in the dark, exposure compounding injury on top of injury, and you get something worse than any single explanation. Not one mystery. A chain of small, ordinary disasters, each one plausible alone, stacking into something that reads, from the outside, like the impossible. In 2020, Russian authorities officially reopened the case, and again concluded an avalanche was the most likely cause. Many researchers still aren't satisfied. The sealed files, the radiation, the missing tongue, the 5-meter climb up a cedar tree in the dark. These details don't disappear just because a report says the case is closed. What does the Dyatlov Pass still mean today? It's a reminder that even with modern forensics, modern physics, and 60 years of hindsight, some human deaths resist a single tidy explanation. We want one cause, one villain, one answer. Nature and chance rarely cooperate with that need. Sometimes, the truth isn't a monster in the woods. It's a pile of small, terrible coincidences that add up to something that looks, from a distance, exactly like a mystery. You're still standing on that frozen slope. The tent is still cut open from the inside. And maybe the most disturbing answer isn't that something hunted them. It's that nothing did, and they ran anyway.